Hello and welcome back to another episode of Story Dev Creator. Story Creator. That's right. And we are, of course, going to be continuing on from our previous video with creating our Convo Finder form, just as previously described. And we will be making this form and populating it with some very interesting features. So, well, I say interesting, it's not that interesting. So, in order to actually go ahead and populate our Convo Finder with a variety of all of these different files that we want to put into the form, the way I'm going to be doing this is actually by using the paint functionality. So we're actually going to be using GDI Plus to actually populate and make it more of a, say, custom control, let's say. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm actually setting up some initial variables. So I've got selector file and search result indices. We'll explain that a bit later. As you can see, what I'm doing here is when we input say an up or down or any kind of text that we add to the text search conversation, then what we want to do is, of course, just go through all of the files that exist from our files array, which we talked about in our previous episode, and then just going through all of that and seeing if any of what we have typed contains the text in the file name, if that makes sense. So another thing that I'm doing here is I'm basically going through and I'm saying to myself, okay, we've got search result indices, and all of the integer variables that exist with search result indices are basically references to the index of the file names that match or otherwise contains the name that we have typed into the text search convo. And I'm actually future-proofing myself here, because what I want to be able to do is try to make this efficient and not have to do the search twice. So as you can see here, I'm making sure that if I've done the search once, I don't really want to do it again, because that's fairly inefficient to do. So as you can see, I'm using this variable called search found to do that. And just here, what we're also going to do is just make sure that the text box is not empty. So if it isn't empty, then we don't want to do anything. Of course, what that means is we can say, okay, if our search result indices has no length to it, then we're just going to use the entire array of global files, and we're just going to populate the entire thing. If you've noticed in all of my programming sessions, my weekly programming sessions, we're basically doing a very similar thing here. So, as with, let's say, database searching functionality, if you've noticed. And as you can see here, I'm using that same form or functionality just as we do in the programming sessions in the actual video game engine, because it is the most efficient way to do it. And most importantly, it's easy to find things. At least in my experience anyway. Obviously everyone's different. So here what we're doing is we are setting up our variables to determine whether we're using we're highlighting the background color for just very simply whether it's white or black or whatever, setting up whether we are highlighting or we've selected the file, we change the background to the forecolor, right? And then we literally just draw a string and eventually fill a rectangle. Fairly simple, nothing too complicated. And we use this local variable called start_y to basically increment by the height of the text plus a little bit of padding there. So that's a padding of 4 pixels effectively. And of course we fill a rectangle as well, if we have to. Make sure we invalidate, because if we don't call invalidate, then we don't actually see any results. So let's take a look. And of course we forget to actually show the form. That might be useful. So here we are, we've got our form. That looks good. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, that looks pretty good so far. But of course the fonts look a bit too big. I'm of course using a 4K monitor, so everything is set up correctly. And here we are, we're typing and nothing's happening. And of course I don't actually use the second part, which is to use search result indices, so we do that. Taking a look at the results here, and it's not quite working as I would expect it to. Wondering what is going on, why is this happening? Eventually I realized that we also need to make sure that even if our search results is empty, we need to also check to see if the text is available or not. And as you can see, the results are better. We actually have results that we actually want. Next thing we're going to do is basically implement our keys up and down so that we can actually select each of our files and of course invalidate as appropriate. And the same with the down key as well. So up and down will do exactly what we hope it will do. We're just going to double check and make sure that we're making sure that our search result indices is being taken into account when we determine our count there. If our count is 0, then we're literally just going to return. We're not going to do anything. And if we do press down, we're actually going to increment the selector file by 1. I always like to be explicit with my coding here. I don't like to use the post increment anymore. Odin kind of gave me that idea, and I think it's a good idea to use that form of making things explicit in exactly what it is that you're doing. As you can see, I'm able to use the up and down arrow keys. I'm moving up and down, and it's all good. So the next thing I want to do is actually figure out how to use the enter key. And what I do is I go back here, and I want to make sure that I'm actually populating a new array of file paths, so that when we press enter, we actually get the file path that we get from here, and actually open up the conversation as we would expect to. need to make sure to, of course, declare that. And in here, we're going to perform the necessary logistics. So we make sure that our selected file is not equal to -1. And we're just basically going to open the file that we want to select. And currently the way this is going to work, I mean, obviously this is literally just going to be a test. And of course nothing. This template stuff, that doesn't need to really exist anymore. But I do reinitialize that just temporarily. And there's another problem here. It thinks that the file doesn't exist, the actual SDD file, which is the story dev data file that the story dev conversation editor needs to know exactly where all of the locations of the branches are and actually create the sort of canvas around that. So here I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. So I realize that the way that the path is being input is actually incorrect. So we actually want to get the full path of the file and not just a part of the file, so that we actually get something a bit more appropriate. And then we get another problem, of course, which is involving maps, map links, which we're no longer going to be using. We remove those components because we no longer need that, and then of course we get more errors as we delete them, of course. And then we finally get a result that's actually appropriate, which is all good. Next thing we do is just make sure that if our text box is in fact empty, then we use the selected file and not the search result file. And in the other case, when we're actually searching, we actually get something that is a bit more appropriate. And we're just testing that to make sure that all works, and it certainly does look that way. We do just one more thing here, which is to make sure that when we actually open the form, that we actually make it the form when it opens actually becomes the parent of the main form rather than the form that's currently active, which is currently what's happening at the moment. And the reason we want to do that is fairly simple. We'll show that in a minute, why that is the case. So we create a finder, we create that event, request open form, and here we're just going to type what type of form it is. We're going to open the file and then actually show it, and the parent is going to be the MDI form. So the way that the behavior of an MDI form works is any child of that form will in fact minimize when the parent is minimized. And that is pretty much it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.